Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Elliot Levine, Research Director at the Aurora Institute, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. It's part of a series of more than 20 webinars we're offering this fall on important issues from the field of personalized competency-based education. There are 4 more webinars coming up in November, and the ones that have already happened are available on our website. You can access all of them through the link that we're putting in the chat. The webinar series is part of our annual Aurora Institute Symposium, which we offered virtually this year. And we had about 40 sessions focused on transforming education practice and policy. And all of the recordings from the symposium are also available on our website. We're putting the link to those in the chat as well. Could I have the next slide, please? During today's webinar, we encourage you to use the chat to help us get to know each other, learn from each other. You could start by introducing yourself there, and please feel free to use it at any time during the webinar to ask questions, answer other people's questions, share resources. Please just use it freely. You could also share your thoughts about the webinar on Twitter or other social media using hashtag Aurora 2020. Or mention our Twitter handle that's shown here. And finally, wanted to mention that today's session will be recorded and archived on the Aurora Institute website. And in the next few days, we'll be sending you an email with a link to the slide deck and the recording. Next slide, please. Today, we're very fortunate to have the opportunity to hear about an essential aspect of competency-based education, which we need to understand so much better, which is using proficiency scales for performance assessment. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Marzano, the founder of Marzano Academies, and Bill Zima, Director of Implementation. They and their colleagues at Marzano Academies have made deep and extensive contributions to the field of competency-based education for many years, and we're excited to have them both with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn it over to Bill to get us started.
Great, thanks, Elliot. Good to see everybody. Let me just check. Yep, okay, I'm unmuted. Good to see everyone, at least in this virtual setting. This is that time of year where, I got to be honest, I'm really feeling it with the inability for us to get together as we have for so many years at the symposium, something I look forward to all the time. So hopefully that next year we'll be able to gather again because I've got so many good friends that I only see once a year. So hoping that happens. So I'm Bill Zima. I'm Director of Implementation now for Marzano Academies. Formerly skipping that word, I used to be Superintendent of RSU2. In Maine. I live in Portland, Maine, where it's beautiful outside, and as is always the case, my neighbor decides it's time to get on his riding mower and start mowing anytime I get on screen. So you guys probably won't be able to hear him, but I can't help but get distracted all the time looking out. So good to see everybody. Very, very, very important topic. So I'm glad that this is being covered, as it always is, through Aurora Institute and the people who attend. So I'm glad to be here, and I get the honor of introducing the founder of the academies and obviously a mentor to me, Dr. Marzano.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, I'm Bob Marzano. I'm coming to you from, we indeed are honored to be able to present for Aurora Institute. And I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado, at my home office, and I know it looks cluttered in back of me. We're a military family, so those are all squadron patches from my son, who's been a naval aviator for 28 years now. I hope that's not too distracting to you. The Marzano Academy is a not-for-profit. We started about 4 years ago to promote competency-based education, and we've got our own view of that, of course. And I don't work for it. I'm on the board. Actually, the brains and the looks behind Marzano Academies is Bill. So I will I like to tease Bill. He's the most talented person I have ever met. If you ever get a chance to ask Bill about his background, it's amazing. And he's a very accomplished musician. So anytime I get a chance to poke fun at Bill, I do. So I will be I think I'm the color commentator. Bill, why don't you start?
For sure. Well, thank you. And so our learning targets for today, what we hope to get across in this brief time we're together, or at least get started, talking about how proficiency scales are designed to kind of give us that foundational knowledge so that we can help the learners be successful in applying that foundational knowledge as they demonstrate proficiency. Skilled at using the scales to build a personal tracking matrix, a traditional test, we're going to talk a little bit about those, and then understand how proficiency scales allow us to create numerous valid, reliable, and unidimensional assessments. I put down the word quickly. It's not something that's quickly at first, but it does. The more you get used to the proficiency scale and what it can really do, the better it is. And obviously we will be talking about the proficiency scale structure, even though there's a lot of them out there. We're of course going to be talking about the one that Dr. Marzano founded, simply because we are Marzano Academies, and to me it's the easiest and most understandable one out there as well. So just to make you aware, on this Padlet, it's available to you. It's padlet.com/Bill Zima. That's me. Just because it's my account, I can't, not that I have to have my name on everything, but there it is. And then the date, today's date is what I decided to call it, so it's easy to find. There's 2 resources on there. They're books that have since kind of gone through a cycle, and they're available there. And it's kind of the cornerstone of the framework that we're going to talk about. So it was a framework that Dr. Marzano was involved in, starting around performance assessment and using proficiency scales and standards to kind of do that. And then of course the theory has just blossomed since that. So, but we wanted to make those available to you. Bob?
Yeah, they are books. They're PDFs, but you can do anything you want with it. They're and they represent kind of the historical context for what we did. So really, they're in what's called the ERIC system. It's a government-sponsored system, and you obviously not look at them at all. But if you like what you see, you can send them to anybody you want. They're somewhat readable. Well, that's not an unbiased perspective, but please feel free to use those.
Yeah, great. So real quick, let's go ahead and it's poll time. So if you guys do me a favor, jump on your phone, jump on another screen, whatever you need to do. Let's get to Mentimeter just to kind of get a sense of what we're thinking. It's also, for me, it's a great way to kind of warm up the mind as we're getting ready to do some kind of heavy lifting as we go on. Really good to kind of, do those warm-ups before you get into those big squats. So you go to menti.com and then you put in that code and then you answer. My favorite season is winter, spring, summer, fall. Now, as you're thinking, if you know me, or if you don't, and you can try to figure out why it goes winter, spring, summer, fall, then it'll give you a little bit of indication into how my mind works. Those of you that have worked with me know how irritating my mind can sometimes be. So, hey, look at that. Not a lot of winter. That's surprising. Definitely fall. You know what I've come to find is the season we're in is the one that always gets the most votes. I don't know why that is. I do love fall, especially here in New England. It's just an incredible season. And doing well. Look at it, just a perfect staircase. So as you're kind of answering this, realize so the answer to that first part, if you want to know how my mind works, James Taylor, winter, spring, summer, or fall. That's so anybody that's works with me knows anytime somebody says a line that's in a song, I'm then distracted for a while. So moving forward, the next one, my comfort level with creating and using performance assessments is, and I've done some reading and thinking with performance assessments. I've applied my understanding a few times. I've applied my understanding on a consistent basis, and I could act as a resource to my colleagues. And you can define colleagues however you would like, but so seeming like a pretty even distribution at the moment. I'm realizing I've been watching way too much news lately, because as the things move, I get this sudden urge. Hey, he's gaining votes in this one. Oh, he's losing votes in that one. Oh, look at that guy's over there. That, oh. But it's a real good study in statistics. Okay, so look at that. I mean, talk about a perfectly evenly split group. You know, half of us are on that side where it's still new learning for us, and half of us are kind of in that point where we've been practicing with it consistently and could actually act as a resource to our colleague. So that's fantastic. So the last part on this is what is one word, or you could do a 2 to 3 word phrase you think of when you hear performance assessment. So what is a word that jumps to your mind, or something, you know, 2 to 3 word phrase? Creativity. So we're going to build a word wall here. Equity, test, real life, student center. And if you're not familiar with the way the word wall works, that the words that are biggest are the ones that have been repeated more than once. And then the size of the word. So like authentic has been mentioned by a lot of people as we go through this. This is one of my favorite things to do, especially when you ask just for that one word or that short phrase, because it really gives you insight into, you know, where that group is feeling. So we've got authentic and personalized, engagement, certainly real world. Those are words commonly associated in our research text around performance assessment and the value of it. So great. Well, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this word wall. And when these polls are done, if you're interested in them, I can stick them up on the Padlet I shared with you earlier. Remember, padlet.com, Bill Zima / today's date 11/5/20, 11/05/20. If you wanted to see them for whatever reason as they continue to build out. So going back to our slides then. So, you know, I want to talk a little bit about the theoretical framework that we use at Marzano Academies for performance assessment. So Marzano Academies really centers around this idea that, you know, you take clear learning outcomes that we put in our proficiency scales, and then you build really great, strong, solid assessments of those proficiency scales. So we want to be able to capture evidence if our students are proficient or not of those scale level 3 items in that proficiency scale. So before we do anything, we get to that assessment. And we believe so strongly that assessment, that's like one of those most important things we do with learners. And then we get into the instruction and how we design them. And performance assessment kind of goes around all of that, because really what we're after is getting kids to apply that foundational knowledge to be able to demonstrate that they understand. So the theoretical framework that we want to use are the 5 dimensions of learning, and then what I call the 3-step thinking process. Bob, did you want to add?
Yeah, just briefly, that's what you have. Those 2 PDF documents, they're all in dimensions of learning. And so they're books. But if you want to get in more depth, take a look at that. And the reason we put it there is that this is my 52nd year in K-12 education. So I've been doing this for a long time. And if I have anything that maybe is of use, maybe it's the historical perspective. And so I'll be talking about that a little bit. But for me, what's going on now with competency-based education is the confluence of kind of 2 movements. One is the thinking skills movement, and that started in the 1980s, and within K-12 education. And ASCD actually started that. That was an amazing decade. And they got a consortium together of educators, scientists, et cetera, to identify what what is thinking, and can we actually teach thinking? And so the dimensions of learning model came out of that, and you'll see a lot of familiar stuff there. The other element that represents the confluence is competency-based education, which actually, for me, I think really you could trace it back to 1964 when John Carroll, who's a psychologist, made the point that, hey, wait a minute, why do we have a system where if you're a certain age, you get the same content, whether you know it or not? And he said, why don't we make learning constant and time variable? And the two of those were put together. And that, you can actually go back to mastery learning. Benjamin Bloom actually was the creator of mastery learning. Tom Gusky was his, protege, and Tom's a brilliant guy. I never met Bloom, but just read his phenomenal work. And in the United States, I think it really got going, that it being competency-based education. For me, it was in the early 90s. And that was and when I first noticed it or became aware of competency-based education as a movement, it was from Chugach School District up in Alaska, a little school district up there. There was an organization funded by the Gates Foundation, the first, I think, the foundation, the first project the Gates Foundation funded, and Chugach School District. And that was at that time Rich DiLorenzo, who I still consider kind of the person who started all this in the United States, amazing guy. And Reinventing Schools Coalition, called RISC, they really made they within the United States, they're the ones who had enough success, and a way of talking about it, such that people start saying, hey, this is this is something we should consider. Actually, I happen to notice it on the list is Kim Hanisch. Hey, Kim. Kim goes way back to the early days of RISC. And if you click down and find Kim and start talking to Kim, she probably knows more than all of us put together here. So anyway, this is competency-based education is not a new thing. Performance assessment is not, they all have historical roots, and I'll again keep trying to add that perspective. Sorry, talked too long there.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. So moving on, the 5 dimensions of learning, really then the giant umbrella of is kind of, or a summary phrase, that learning is an active, constructive experience in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? So it's not, it's that whole bit of thinking and processing, as Bob was talking about, that really matters. So if that's what that dimension of learning is, then our assessments for and of learning should reflect this holistic approach. And that's just a board of an art teacher that we work with outside of Chicago in Proviso East High School. And she's done a great job of being able to take the proficiency scales, and kids just create these magnificent pieces of art and art portfolios, and even writings and stuff. I always love going to her class when I get to visit, because it's just amazing. So the 5 dimensions of learning, then dimension number 1 deals with positive attitudes and perceptions about learning, right? So if it underneath it, there's a bullet there, and it's a safe and orderly environment, and the SLI 1. So the Marzano Academies as an organization, we help schools realize 16 school level indicators. That's actually my job as a director of implementation. Dr. Marzano has recognized that there's 16 school level indicators that, when working together, really get you to that high reliability organization. And so it's my job to not go in and tell districts and schools what to do, but to help guide them so that they're getting the right outcomes to show that they're meeting that school level indicator. So obviously, safe and orderly environment has always been at the top of the list when it comes to learning. When you think of Maslow's hierarchy, when you think of social emotional learning, that whole idea of a safe and orderly environment is critical. And so we like to do things, codes of conduct and shared visions and monitoring tools for kids to kind of track their behavior and make progress on it. So those are all pieces that you see as part of that dimension 1, which is a critical dimension.
Bill, I'm going to add a little something there. Yeah. Oh, first of all, I've got a frog in my throat. That's why I keep drinking something there. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. But if you're wondering, well, wait a minute, this is about performance assessment. Why are we bringing in these other things? One belief I've come to after 50 years of doing this and traveling all over the country, I've worked in every state, at least 3 times by my count over those 5 decades, is that you can't think of any intervention in isolation. You know, I mean, too often we've done that. I've done that and said, if we only did this, an intervention exists in the context of other interventions. At the school level, and better yet at the district level, you know, if you should look at all of the things you're doing, and they should represent a cohesive theory about, you know, what you do to improve student learning. So you might have 15 different things going on, and they're all good in and of themselves, but they clash into one another. And so that's why we always take a big perspective. So it's not just performance assessment. Performance assessment lives in the context of something. And for us, part of that context has to be, well, you know, what about the attitudes that, you know, that are being generated in the school, in the classroom? And certain attitudes will enhance the use of performance assessment, and certain attitudes will diminish the utility of performance assessment.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, and you know, growing on that, one of the cornerstones of agency is, you know, a student's perceived ability based upon their capacity, that they have that ability to control their lives. And, you know, that's where agency comes from. And, you know, a low attitude about your performance, that also then means low engagement. And so that means low, you know, agency. And so it's really critical that we structure ourselves to get there. And then also working within that student zone of proximal development is going to increase their sense of agency. So, you know, we want to get into that perception and really work with them. And then that's when you get into the dimensions 2, 3, and 4 really kind of center on what you do with content, what you do with knowledge, how you kind of introduce it and grow. So dimension 2 is acquiring and integrating knowledge. As part of our model, we call that cumulative review and knowledge maps. Dimension 3 is extending and refining the knowledge, which is your cognitive analysis skills. And we're going to go a little bit more into these a little bit later. And then dimension 4 is that you're using knowledge meaningfully. So you plan units so students have the opportunity to kind of use that knowledge meaningfully and show that they're applying it to be able to, that they demonstrate understanding of that scale level 3. So, you know, we talk about knowledge utilization skills and the cognitive analysis skills, which are part of our model. Anything on?
Yeah. The, you know, way of, again, we're giving our particular view of the components that should be in this grand scheme. And somebody had texted ecological thinking. Absolutely. That's what has to be, we would assert, has to be done for a highly well-running and effective school district, you know, and classroom. It's interesting in the research world, that's now required of most proposals that you send into whatever organization will require a logic model, you know, or a theory of action. And it's interesting how that, even with relatively straightforward, you know, experimental research is not anymore like it used to be. And that is, well, you know, what's your intervention? Get a control group and off you go. No, it's no. What's the theory of action behind it, or the logic model? So that's the first place to start. What's your model? This happens to be ours.
Perfect. So, and then one of the things, you know, when I'm working with people is talking about the idea of thinking, and thinking is a process, and really process, 3 things happen in a process. If you want to oversimplify it, right? Something's got to go in, something's got to happen, and something's got to come out, right? And so if you think of the way processes work, that's the way it is, right? If you're talking about hydroelectric power, water comes in, they spin over the spinny things, and electricity comes out. And, you know, if you think about the cooking as a process, right? You throw all this stuff in, you put it in the oven, and something happens, and then a donut comes out on the other end. I don't know how, but I'm happy that they do. And so thinking is that same kind of process where something's got to go in, and that's where you deal with skills, data, facts, vocabulary, right? All that knowledge or all that information gets inputted into a kid's brain so that they can process through it and start turning that into knowledge. And then once that kind of knowledge is in, then we can work with them and kind of tear it apart and help them put it together and make that kind of new learning, as we were talking about, so that they can output that understanding. So you go from that information getting inputted to building that knowledge where it starts to kind of go together to being able to show that larger construct of a conceptual understanding. And a lot of times our outputs are essays, posters, plays, papers, you know, those types of performance. But that green area, that's like what we think of as the cognitive zone, right? That area where we're actually going to be doing that processing of the information into knowledge and then outputting as the understanding. Now, there's a neuroscientist out of Boston University. His name is Mark Moss. And I got the pleasure of hearing him talk once. And he said, attention is the gateway to the mind or to the brain. If you don't have their attention, you don't have anything, right? So you could have the best lesson in the world, but if you don't have their attention, then you're just kind of there. And so in order to get into attention, that's where the research talks about having student voice and choice. That's where that motivation comes from, is how can you get students to feel like they belong in the classroom, they have some control over the classroom, and then they also have choice in how they can go about demonstrating their understanding. So that attention to the gateway, that to me deals with those attitudes and perceptions. You know, if the kids don't have a good attitude, if they don't have good perception, then they're not going to give their attention. And then you're not even going to get into the cognitive zone to do some processing. And then once you're in, remember I mentioned earlier about cognitive analysis and knowledge application. Those are so cognitive analysis is where you're dealing with processing. And then knowledge application is where you're dealing with the outputting and the understanding. And I'm going to tie those kind of neuroscience things, that cognitive science stuff, back into words that we recognize a little more regularly. So like cognitive analysis skills, the way that you're actually kind of taking in information and kind of analyzing and pulling it apart, those are the things we do with learners, like comparing and classifying, analogical reasoning, analyzing perspectives, and so on and so forth. And then those knowledge application, how we're asking kids to kind of demonstrate their understanding. That's where you get problem solving, decision making, experimental inquiry, and so on. So those two pieces are really important as we go to construct. It works right in with our framework in dimensions 3 and 4, but they need to be there. Bob?
Oh, no, keep going. In a bit I will.
All right. So, and then dimension 5 is the productive habits of mind. So this is where you have mental habits to help individuals learn whatever they want when they need to. So we want them to have good mental habits, right? I mean, we know that's one of the cornerstones of what we want to do as educators. That's one of the cornerstones of what Aurora Institute is trying to do. And to me, that is the real equity lever, that if we're working and we develop these strong mental habits in all learners, that's where that equity comes from. So, you can think of them as metacognitive skills, thinking about thinking, getting them strong and embedded in that. And then of course, agency. And again, I'll define agency because I think it's so critical. It's the perceived ability of the individual based upon their capacity to control their lives. So you've got to have two pieces there, right? It's the perceived ability. That's great that you think I can do it, but if I don't think I can do it, then that's a problem. And the only way I'm going to know I can do it is when I look back and see that I have actually done it, right? So one of the things I used to say at RSU2 when I, as superintendent, which to all my superintendent friends out there, how are you? I think the only good part of the job is actually graduation when you get to shake the kids' hands. Other than that, it's a really tough job. And so I used to tell the kids all the time that I'm happy you're graduating from RSU2 because we are a proficiency-based system. So you're going out into the world knowing that you can because you did. And we can show them exactly where they were to become successful. So really excited about that. But they've got to know that they have that capacity to do it and not just us telling them that they are. So the metacognitive skills, and we're used to these, we've heard them, staying focused when answers and solutions aren't immediately apparent, pushing the limits, seeking accuracy, seeking clarity, critical skills to have in successful people.
Yeah, and just give the historical, these, especially dimensions 2, 3, and 4, that all came out of the thinking skills movement. It really did. Like the metacognitive skills, that was first talked about in K-12 education, or first popularized by the work of Art Costa, Bennett Kallick, people like that, Scott Paris, whom I think is retired now. The cognitive skills came out of the work of great theorists and researchers like David Perkins. Oh gosh, I just went blank, but read those books we gave you and you'll see all these really smart people that are on them. So this, again, from my perspective, it's like, oh my gosh, all of this really good stuff is coming together, at a time when it makes sense for it to all come together. So these are not new ideas, they're not, but when you put them together, they get adapted now. Metacognitive skills is used in a competency-based system or within performance assessment adds a little something to the original discussion of it. So again, take a look at those two books. There's a lot there.
Great. So again, looking at this map, then you have that cognitive zone, right? Cognitive analysis, how you're analyzing the information to kind of build that knowledge, and then how you're going to apply it to show that it's an output. And then that all works kind of in that, in the, sorry, I'm a science guy, but, you picture things floating around in liquid and, to keep them all smooth and working well. I think it's actually called Varsoil. So excuse my use of something that maybe people don't know, but that's what I see when I see this. And excuse my crude lines too. I actually drew those myself. Kind of almost looks like something out of Scooby-Doo. But that green zone represents the metacognitive, or those habits of mind, right? That's got to kind of be around everything from the beginning all the way through the process. Kids should be reflecting and using those metacognitive skills to determine how they're doing moving through that learning process to get to the goal that they want to reach. So Bob, go ahead.
Yeah, well, actually, Scooby-Doo was one of the original theorists relative to competency-based education. You realize we're the only ones who know who Scooby-Doo relates to that. Actually, one thing that within the thinking skills movement, this might have been a David Perkins, Harvard professor distinction, that output, it's easy to think that output means there's got to be some audience other than the student. And that's a nice touch to have an audience. It really is. But he said, ultimately, the audience is for the learner, him or herself, that the change that should occur, should be new information or an adaptation of what's already there. So I think it's easy, particularly with performance assessment, to get tied up in what's the output and then what's the audience for that output. And that's good. It adds some really nice stuff. But if there is an audience, and that doesn't create any change in the student. And sometimes it has to be overt, and actually, though you mentioned we get it in the academies through cumulative review. What's new now? What new thinking do you have? What misconceptions do you now realize that you had? What's been added? What's been deleted? What's been changed?
Yeah, that's great. Great point. So with that theory, then our goal becomes assessment should encourage learners to use knowledge in unique and interesting ways and develop the metacognitive skills necessary for agency, right? So, and that's just what Bob was talking about, that to me, and that's great. I never heard it phrased that way, but that's always kind of been that thought in me. It's the learner that needs to make that change and not just the audience that's there. So that's awesome. So the pathway then is performance assessment. It's a really great way to get there. So, Dr. Marzano says classroom assessment must be viewed from a new paradigm that allows it to be used to its full potential as a tool for feedback, right? So we want to give learners feedback. It's going even like that 3-step process of thinking. If you want to go down to an even simpler way of thinking about learning, try something, receive feedback, improve performance because of that feedback, receive more feedback, improve performance, receive more feedback. You know, when you think about it, that's exactly what happens with us, you know, as adults, with things that we're really good at and things that we're learning. I know, as Bob said, you know, I do like to play music, and I play every Thursday night. And so I get a list of songs I'm supposed to work on. And anybody that knows me knows I'm a drummer by trade, but I'm playing bass in this band. And to be quite honest with you, if I play the song and I get one note right the first time I play it, you know, I'm celebrating. That's great. Now, I've obviously received a ton of feedback, both from myself and from my bandmates, that I'm missing some pieces. So then I try to improve my performance, get more feedback, improve performance. But even something we're really good at, teachers should be trying that all the time, right? You try something, get that feedback, adjust it, and keep going. So that's where assessment can really help us get to that, give us the right evidence to be able to give that feedback so learners can improve performance. So performance assessment then, as it's defined in the books that are available on the Padlet, a variety of tasks and situations in which students are given opportunities to demonstrate their understanding of a concept or execution of a strategy by thoughtfully applying that knowledge, skills, and habits of mind in a variety of contexts. So when you look at that definition, then the things that kind of jump out, they've got to occur over time, right? Performance assessment is not something that can be done in a day. You know, there's got to be some time to it, typically. Tangible product or observable performance. So there's something that comes out of it. And it doesn't have to be, we used to have a joke when I was principal at Mount Ararat Middle School, and we were working through these, that the outcome of your performance assessment doesn't have to be that you've built an outhouse every time, right? It doesn't have to be this like giant undertaking of things that happen. So you know, it can be something more appropriate, but it should still be some kind of tangible product or observable performance. Self-evaluation and revision is critical. Again, try something, get feedback, improve performance, right? So you need to have those pieces and that opportunity for revision based upon that feedback, not just, you know, it's done, here's your feedback, now we're moving on to something else. There's got to be that iterative cycle built in. And then reveal degrees of proficiency based on established public scoring criteria. So it's clear, right? The criteria is clear. Everybody talks about it. Dr. Marzano's been talking about it for a long time. Dr. Hattie, we got to be clear on what our expectations are of kids. And even when I go into some classrooms still to today, you know, kids have no idea what's going on. Now, understand, I get that, right? I know that there are just some kids you could ask them, you know, what's going on, and they never have any clue. But I'm talking on a more consistent basis, you know, where you can kind of tell that the kids are just kind of lost.
Well, just a couple of things on the criteria. The and again, this I mean, this we find these things out when we try them and say, wait a minute, that could go awry. One is the tangible product or observable performance. Well, first of all, let me back up. I think you have to decide if you're going to use performance assessment. Are you going to judge how well it works based on only the extent to which it provided you information about what students know or don't know? Or are you going to also include that you judge it on the basis of it being a learning vehicle or a vehicle for learning? And I think the mistake we made in the past, you know, was that we said performance assessment. They're going to be over time, you know, be more interesting to students, and we'll get to see a lot of aspects of what they know and what they don't know. Actually, if you're just looking at measurement of knowledge, maybe a performance assessment isn't the best thing to do. But if you add that, wait a minute, this is both assessment, information about students, but it's also a vehicle for learning, then it's hard to beat, you know. So it's got to be viewed in both those ways. And then the tangible product. When performance assessment first, you know, started getting popular, it was really the main focus of the tangible product, and that's where we got everything turned into, you know, a collage. Everything turned into something that students built. And what we found out is, wait a minute, that doesn't always fit. It really doesn't fit. Yeah, the distinction between procedural and declarative knowledge happens now. It's helpful now. Procedural knowledge is skill or process. That lends itself to performance assessment. It really does. You know, and let me just think about it. Music is very procedural in nature. What are the assessments? Well, show me you can do this. Show me you can use this fingering. Show me you can you can play this song. So procedural knowledge, it's very easy to turn that into a performance assessment. Little performance, you know, or big performance. Declarative is not so much, and that's where it gets artificial. If you want students to demonstrate an understanding of, you know, the Battle of Gettysburg, maybe it's not very useful to have them act out Gettysburg. You know, it just takes a lot of time and energy, and you really don't get at, do they understand it? However, when I go back to the tangible product can be a new understanding on the part of the student. And if that is articulated, first of all, that's a very powerful, you know, a very powerful learning activity. James Britton, who's passed on now, but he was a brilliant psychologist in the United Kingdom, and his area of expertise was writing, composition. And he made the point, and actually the whole writing to learn movement, if you will, kind of goes back to James Britton's thinking in his theory. And he said, when you put words on something, you now have a learning that didn't occur until the moment of utterance. And I always like that. First of all, it's just, I love the way, I wish I could, you know, write and speak like that. It's at the moment of utterance, you know, you come up, that's it. Oh my God, I didn't realize that before. So that's a legitimate product, a tangible product. Can't be tangible if they just say, okay, now think about what you learned. The tangible would be write out what you just learned. And that's a viable and very powerful tangible product of a performance assessment.
Awesome. Thank you. So, you know, again, talking about that need for time, and then it requires students to construct new knowledge. So, you know, articulate a unique position on something or defend it. And like, you know, you know, it doesn't have to be that your fifth graders and sixth graders have developed an entire new theory of construct for the world. It's that it's new to them, that they're the ones that have built this new understanding and this new construct. So the unique position is for them. So how do you go about it then? One, identify your measurement topics and proficiency scales. Again, we use measurement topics and we use proficiency scales. Identify what you want to be as part of that performance assessment. What do you want kids to be able to be thinking around so that you're going to be able to give them feedback to improve on that performance? Simply letting kids go explore can be overwhelming to a lot of learners because they're just not quite simply sure where that improvement's going to come from. So Dr. Marzano said in the new Art and Science of Classroom Assessment, you know, rewriting standards to measurement topics that are assessed multiple times, that really is what helps to give us that accurate score for individual students. So when we're looking at, that's why I said earlier, assessment is one of the most important things we do as educators, is because we're trying to figure out this individual learner, where they are, and we're going to actually give them feedback for how they can improve their performance. I can't think of anything more important that we do than to give somebody feedback on how they can improve their performance so that they become stronger in their belief of self and know that they have the power to control their lives. So after you get those measurement topics identified, then you build that proficiency scale so that you start to build, here's the foundational knowledge you're going to need to get to this understanding or you know, be able to execute this skill without error. So and then in making classroom assessments valid and reliable, those proficiency scales, you know, it's Bob said a teacher should be able to transform one of those into multiple assessments, what we call parallel assessments on specific topics, so that you know, it's not just the learner is involved in the performance assessment and then we're not going to really give them any feedback until they finish that performance assessment, right? We want to be able to give them feedback throughout the process. So by having the proficiency scales, as we're going to talk about, you could see how those proficiency scales can guide not just a test, not just a performance, but the ability to give learners feedback on improvement as they go forward. So those of you unfamiliar with the proficiency scale structure that Dr. Marzano has that we've used, the scale level 2 is where that foundational knowledge is. That's where, what do we need students to know or be able to do so that they're going to be successful at meeting that measurement topic, that scale level 3. So in that scale level 3, so scale level 2 would have vocabulary, it would have, simpler processes. And when I say simpler, please don't hear me as easier. They're simpler in the form of they're less complex in the number of steps required to execute that skill appropriately. Kind of like the difference between simple machines and complex machines. And then the scale level 3 is what we want. That's the goal, right? That's the learning target, the learning goal, that's the outcome. And then if they can apply that foundational knowledge at a cognitive level that has them go beyond what we were looking for, that's where you get into that scale level 4.
Bill, you had asked me to keep an eye on the chat box. If there were questions, I just wanted to share a question that came in from Carla Evans.
Yeah.
Carla wrote, do you think of proficiency scales as synonymous with learning progressions? And can you define proficiency scales more or give examples?
Can I do that, Bill? Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
They're not. Proficiency scales are not synonymous with learning progressions, but are embedded in learning progressions. Learning progressions, that whole discussion about them, really kind of got a lot of energy around Common Core when the attempt was at a national level to identify, well, what is the progression of knowledge from one grade level to another? So if you think of learning progressions, if you're kind of going back to the original definition, that was an articulation of knowledge and skill across grade levels. Within a grade level, you will have topics, and each one of those topics, let's say mathematics, you might have 15 topics. Each one of those 15 topics will be part of a learning progression, which means that there'll be a topic above it and topic below it. That's a new term. Below it. That's why I want to be James Britton. That wasn't very eloquent. I'm sorry. I have to laugh at myself because everybody else does. Within a grade level, you have topics. Each topic's part of a progression, but that topic itself at a particular grade level has a progression of knowledge, and that's what a proficiency scale is. It's an attempt to say, okay, this topic called, balancing a linear equation, what does that look like? What's proficiency in that? What's the simpler content, and what's the more complex application? So they kind of get used the same, but they're not. Learning progressions, they say, we're looking at the bigger picture.
Good. So you identify that measurement topic and its related proficiency scale that you want to have in your performance assessment. And then you structure the task around that cognitive analysis skill and knowledge application skill, excuse me. Bob, I think somehow you sent me your frog over the internet. Now it's all. So you structure the task around those, and then you write a first draft of a performance task. So for instance, here's a history measurement topic, explain significant aspects of US involvement in World War II, right? So that's the history measurement topic. I'm going to want them to do comparing. That's the cognitive analysis skill I'm bringing in. And I'm going to want them to make a decision. So that's my knowledge application skill. And so it's not linear. That's what the arrows are supposed to show. So as you tweak this, that might change. You may decide that you don't want to do comparing. You want to do something else like classifying or error analysis. So you kind of massage those around as you then go and try to write your performance assessment. So for instance, President Harry Truman has requested that you serve in a White House task force. That should be an A and not a W. The goal is to decide how to force the unconditional surrender of Japan, and so on and so forth. And then the assignment, and so that's kind of the context you're building. Hey, kids, you're going to be on this committee. And so as a committee, you're trying to decide whether to drop the bomb, identify the alternatives you are considering, right? So you're going to be doing some comparing and the criteria that you're going to use. So like when you look at comparing, it isn't just telling the kids, okay, go compare and contrast and come back, right? There's an actual strategy and structures to comparing. And there's actually proficiency scales. Dr. Marzano has created proficiency scales for the cognitive process of comparing, so that we're actually modeling for kids and we're teaching them. If you tell them to just go and do it, then you're probably not going to get the results you're looking for, because comparing is a process where it's great to be modeled and in practice, receive feedback and improve your performance. And then the last part then, after we go through that, then you identify the metacognitive skill. And in this case, before you begin, establish a clear goal and write it down, then write a plan for accomplishing this goal, right? So we're going to bring in the metacognitive skill around setting goals and making plans. So kids are going to set goals, and then they're going to reflect on their progress towards accomplishing that goal. So those pieces all come together: the content, the cognitive analysis, and the cognitive or the knowledge application, and then the metacognitive skills come together to help build that access to the performance assessment. Bob, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Not content-wise, but I'm sorry, I just got to say this. It's going to sound like a verbal. If you look at the book, the PDF you have, what is it? Performance assessment using dimensions of learning. The actually master at creating performance assessments using dimensions of learning was Deborah Pickering. And I have to mention Deborah, she's an author in that book, and Deborah passed away on Monday. So she was just, and I know some of you have to recognize that name. She's just spectacular at this. But this is, this model is a testament to Deborah's thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That's good. So then you talk about, well, how are they going to present this, right? And so you can present your conclusions in at least two of the following ways, a written report, a letter to the president, so on and so forth, so that you can kind of determine what is going to be that tangible product. And remember, the purpose or the desired outcome is really that the learner is building that new knowledge, right? It's not like what the outcome is, that it's something that can go into the Smithsonian Institute. It's that the kid is actually building and understanding that they're increasing in their ability to control their lives.
Can I answer? Carla just asked, how do proficiency scales relate to rubrics? Here's the difference. Rubrics, and people use these terms differently, by the way, but in general, a rubric is specific to a task. Okay, a proficiency scale is not. So a rubric, if you wrote a rubric for a specific performance that only applies to if you wrote a description of knowledge and skill and levels that only apply to that task, you got a rubric. If you have a rubric, though, that's a statement of a progression of knowledge and skill, and that could be demonstrated many different ways, and that represents what should be taught to students, then it's more of a proficiency scale. And the two do get used the same. Actually, we talk about that in that book called Performance Assessment using using dimensions of learning.
Good. So just to kind of wrap up, oh man, we're really getting tight on time, but we talk a lot about assess more and test less, right? And so we want to be able to assess. And so, something like with probing discussion. So while the kids are working on their performance assessment, while they're building that knowledge, while they're kind of gaining, there's other ways to capture evidence. So what we say at Marzano Academies is anything the learner does that gives you evidence towards moving through that proficiency scale, that's evidence that you want to capture. That's that and hold on to and use that to help improve learner performance. So on the left is the proficiency scale for the U.S. involvement in World War II, and on the right is what we call a probing discussion template. Just something like this is something that I used, right? I updated it for this, but it's some people are good with probing discussions and just kind of go off the cuff. I never recommend it. So I always said, had it written out. So if a learner came to me and we were still kind of working around level 2 questions, I had them spelled out so that I didn't have to try to think what they were.
Just to Julie had asked the question, what book? Julie, you have those books. If you go to the what's it called? The Padlet?
Padlet, yeah.
If you go to the Padlet that Bill mentioned, you have 2 PDFs. One, the book is right there. I forgot who asked the question, how does this relate to adaptive testing? That adaptive assessment, is not designed for performance assessment. Adaptive assessment is really more closely, it's a great form of assessment, it really is, but it's more closely aligned to the specific information and skills relative to a topic or a concept. And what's really powerful about adaptive assessment is that that's built on some progression of knowledge and skill. And if I know this, I can jump up to this. But again, performance assessment has the piece where it's also a learning tool. That's, you can argue about what's more important, is a measurement tool or the learning tool. Adaptive assessment is more specific to, I'm trying to read here. Adaptive assessment is I just got lost. That was Scott Marion. Hey Scott. Hey Scott, how you doing? I didn't read your whole thing though. How are proficiency different from unpacking standards for instructional purposes? Oh, no, that wasn't. Proficiency scales. This is somebody else's, Carla. Proficiency scales do get created by unpacking standards. They do. That's how you start. But they're used for instruction and assessment. Scott Marion, I'm sorry that didn't get to your question. I'm honored, Scott Marion. Right? He's one of the leading experts in the country, and I feel like an idiot now. I probably shouldn't have said 90% of what I said.
Well, just because we've got like 2 minutes, just to kind of wrap up and throw it back to Elliot. It's so really, as you're doing the performance assessment, don't be waiting until the performance opportunity to capture that evidence as you're going through it. That's where the proficiency scales can lend themselves to probing discussion, to observation, to presentation, to demonstration, to using personal tracking matrices that look like this, that kind of align with, here's the scale level 2 stuff we want you to work on, and the learner can kind of go through it and they know where their progress is. And you're constantly giving feedback as you're helping to build that foundational knowledge, that scale level 2 with the kids. You're assessing all the time. Those opportunities should be captured so that we're not saying to kids like, hey, compare the 2 themes in this book, turn to your neighbor and talk. And then they do, and they do this great demonstration that they get what you're asking them to do, right? They're proficient at it. But then it's like, well, but you're going to have to do it again on the test. And it's like, well, but that's great evidence of where the kid is. Use that as evidence to give them feedback on their performance and keep track of it so that it isn't just about the test. And then as they get to that performance assessment, they will have had those opportunities through that iterative cycle. So, always never enough time to really get into detail on absolutely everything we want to talk about. But obviously, if you have any questions at all, you can email Bob, or you can feel free to email myself as well. We're both, Robert Marzano at Marzano Academies, and Bill Zima at Marzano Academies. Happy. I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, all night long. So excited. So Elliot, did you want to?
Sure. Let me just make sure I'm unmuted here. I am. Great. And we would love to hear you talk about it all night. But unfortunately, we need to move on for now, but we hope the conversation will continue over time. And just wanted to let everybody know some of those slides that went by quickly, they will be part of the slide deck that will be available on our website. As I'm thanking folks as we wrap up, please notice that in the chat, there's a survey link. We'd love if you took 1 minute to complete this survey to give us some feedback about the session. And Bob and Bill, thank you so much. It was really great to hear about performance assessments and proficiency scales and that model at the beginning to really help us think about why we're doing this. It's terrific to have the opportunity to hear from both of you, and thank you to everybody who participated today. We appreciated the engagement with the polls and the Mentimeter and in the chat. And yeah, it'd be great if you filled out that survey. While you're finishing up the survey, and could I have the next slide, Bill? Thank you. I want to share more information about our webinar series. We have 4 remaining webinars in November that are shown here on a variety of topics related to competency-based education. There are more detailed descriptions on our website, and the link for those will be going into the chat. Oh, it's in there already. Thank you, Jessica. And all the other webinars in our fall series that have just finished are also available, the slide decks and the recordings at that same link. And can I have the next slide, please? And great, once again, thanks to everyone for participating in today's webinar. Please stay in touch with us at the Aurora Institute, and please join me in thanking Bob Marzano and Bill Zima from Marzano Academies for their presentation today. Great to see everybody, and hope to see you all again soon. Take care.
Thanks,
Thank you.
folks.